Injuries and sport go together like Tim Broomhead's leg used to. Everyone, and I mean everyone, who's played sport at any level for any length of time has been injured. Here's my injury history, or at least everything requiring treatment, as an example. It's a fact of life. For sports teams, managing injuries is a key part of guaranteeing success. Look at the Don Pike era Crows. In 2016 and 17, they stayed ridiculously healthy, using an average of only 30 players. That's 7 players outside their round 1 starting 23 used total. In 2018, they suffered more injuries and fell away. You know who didn't? West Coast. They led the league in lack of rotations, using only 33 players for the first time in 20 years. You know what they did? This. It is basic maths. A team that has to rely on fewer depth players will generally have more success. It is exceedingly rare to use 40 or more players in a season. Expansion clubs basically have to, rotating tired players unused to the strains of senior football. Aside from those, 2010 Richmond held the record with 42. This team was beautiful, a rolling disaster that had lumbered around the ladder's cellar for years. Look at the guys getting games here. Relton Roberts, Robert Hicks, Ty Vickery, Jerome Weberly, Ben Nason got 19 games, somehow. This was a trash team, bound to go nowhere. Who was the poor bastard in charge of this scrap heap? Oh, okay. Cool. I'm fine. Well, good luck with the new scrap heap dimmer. No other side, not even during the COVID years, came near his mark of 42. And then 2022 West Coast used 47 players. Yeah, 47. Enough for 2 full squads of 23 with a reserve to, help Adam Simpson with goal umpiring. For reference, squads are capped at 38 with an additional rookie list of up to 6. So how did this happen? Well, it started early, as in the pre-season the Eagles lost Luke Shuey to injury, and Jack Dowling. They also lost Luke Edwards and Liam Duggan. And West, Joyce, True, Clark, Cripps and Sheed, with Oscar Allen, Campbell Chesser and Tom Cole suffering long-term injuries that put a line through their entire seasons right at the start. Combined with Liam Ryan and Tim Kelly getting illnesses, 16 of West Coast's 42-man roster are unavailable. For those doing the maths, West Coast now had 26 active players to fill 23 spots. Only 6 of those players were slated to return in the next fortnight. Before a ball had even been bounced in round 1, West Coast's season was done. And then, somehow, it got worse. A COVID outbreak meant 12 of West Coast's round 1 starters had to miss 2 weeks under the AFL's health and safety protocols. The good news was that all of those 6 players that could come back by round 2 did. The bad news, well, you've probably already done the maths. 26 plus 6 minus 12 is less than the 23 required to field an AFL side. And it got worse still. Jackson Nelson injured his knee minutes before the game, meaning Declan Mountford came into the side as a late replacement, a 14th change from the round 1 side, breaking the record infamously set by Ross Lyons Fremantle, and it could have been 15 if Rioli's suspension was upheld the previous week. Mountford himself was apparently getting changed into his match gear in an Etihad Stadium lift after the match had already begun, such was his late notice. You might be asking how Mountford was able to play, considering he was last on an AFL list 4 years ago for the very team he was about to play against. Well, he, along with 4 WA-based players, was selected as COVID top-up replacements, much as Essendon had drafted guys like Matt D and Jared Petrenko after the 2015 Asada saga. Each club had nominated a list of 20 potential replacements, and of those 360 players, only the West Coast 5 were ever activated. Ainsworth injured his knee in this very match, true to form for 2022 West Coast, which was his only appearance, allowing Mountford to be activated as the sub in one of 2 appearances. Dua D, War, whoever, Gyro and Black were all only required once as West Coast slowly and steadily got their shit together, and the blooding of mid-season draftee Jai Cully in round 18 ensured, for the first time in AFL history, that every single player on a team's list played at least one match. A thorough review was conducted at the end of the 2022 season to ensure this sort of mammoth injury crisis wouldn't ever happen again. In 2023, it happened again, and it created one of the worst football teams to have ever played the game. Now, let's perform a post-mortem on the 2023 West Coast Eagles. The 22 Eagles had a remarkable 14 pre-season injuries. There was a team that matched them in 2023, but it was St Kilda. West Coast only had 3 unavailable players, and only one of them was a certain starter. One had an injured spleen, for God's sake. What are you going to do to prevent that? Cut it out of him on draft night? West Coast lost in a lacklustre performance to an inspired ruse in round 1, but suffered no losses aside from, the scoreboard. Round 2 was even better, taking care of an insipid Giants to notch win number 1, with all 23 Eagles walking home under their own steam. Elliot Yeo had suffered a calf strain, but he'd be back soon, the medicos assured, better than ever, while some rookies missed round 3 with strains of their own. No biggie. And then, as it has done so often for West Coast, it all went wrong in the derby. See, I can learn. Shuey, McGovern, Cripps, and Witherden. For a struggling team to lose 3 150 gamers in one match is rough, let alone in a tight and exciting derby. But at least they still had a big list of players to replace them with, including Yeo, who finally returned in round 4. But it went deeper than that. Liam Ryan and the permanently unlucky Campbell Chesser had impact injuries that flared up after the fact, also missing the Demons game. And yes, the Eagles got belted over the next 2 weeks against tough opponents, but even as they lost men, they displayed spirit and tenacity. The real killers were WAFL and training injuries. Bergiel and Harry Edwards went down twice in 3 weeks. Elliot Yeo hurt himself again, and Winder, Long, and Halhoff, whatever, were hurt midweek before round 6's matchup against the Power, taking the injury list to 15, with a further 5 Eagles having missed matches prior. Bailey Williams recovered to take on the Power, preventing the injury list from swelling further. He and Ruben Jinby were bright spots in a lacklustre season, performing admirably and becoming fantasy must-haves at the very least. Also, if Williams hadn't have played that day, the poor 4th choice, nowhere near AFL ready Harry Barnett would have been thrown out there like a bunny rabbit to a chainsaw. Shuey, well, he hurt himself within 15 minutes of his return and joined the list of frequent flyers to the Eagles' medical wing with an ankle injury. That was West Coast's 5th ankle injury of the year, in round 6. But so far, the Eagles had held up. They'd prevented a thrashing for the ages against Geelong and had gone the distance against the strong Port Adelaide. But of all teams, it was a floundering Carlton that were the first to put them to the sword. The Eagles never got close, losing by 108, as well as losing former Blue Sam Petrevski-Seaton to a corked thigh that bled into his knee, and Rhett Bazzo to a concussion. The Tigers also held them at arm's length the next week, with Jai Cully going down with a serious knee injury, a pity as he'd been playing himself into good form. With an injury list as long as your arm, but not Jack Darling's after he broke his, the beatings began to get embarrassing. Despite not scoring a goal in the 3rd quarter, the Suns still racked up a 70-point away win against the Eagles. This left West Coast and indeed Jermaine Jones with a bloodied nose. Harry Edwards didn't even get time to recover in the seconds after a fractured wrist. Nope, just straight in to get torched by the Suns and then comprehensively belted by the 17th placed Hawks, a team that was accused of tanking at that time. The Eagles scored 3 goals and had lost all of their fighting spirit, as well as Jermaine Jones, cleared of a broken nose but receiving an ankle injury this week. Poor bastard. They got some big names back for a mere 50-point loss to the Bombers, but lost Dom Sheed and the freshly returned Luke Edwards, joining the other Edwards, who was also injured again. The Eagles gave it a red-hot go against Collingwood, going blow for blow in the third, including in the battle for most injuries before falling away late. This, along with the return of Shuey and Darling, gave the Eagles a great lift for their match against an inconsistent Adelaide. Or at least it would have. But the Eagles, in addition to their 3 confirmed injuries against the Pies, lost a further 4 during the week. Mid-season draftee Ryan Marriage, who'd only been on an AFL list for a matter of days and who was stacking the shelves at Woolies 2 weeks ago, was their first and leading scorer of the night, as a 33-year-old Taylor Walker tore them apart. It was their second biggest loss outside of their first 3 years of existence, and was the 13th ever 100-point loss for the team. 5 of those were within the last 14 months. The bye could not have gotten here soon enough. Their injury list stood, or rather lay down in pain, at 18 with the addition of Luke Foley's hamstring. Of their 45 listed players, including Ryan Marriage, 31 had suffered injuries to the halfway mark of the season. 11 of those players had been injured twice, more than the active injury lists of all teams bar GWS at the point of the bye. West Coast staggered to their bye at 1-12, with their losing streak hitting 11, breaking the club record which was set in the first game of this year. Still, not like it could get any worse, right? The 15th placed Sydney scored 2 goals in the first minute and a half. Their quarter-time lead was 52. The Swans' 9 goals for was equal or higher than 6 West Coast full match scores before that night, and it only got uglier from there, with West Coast striving to make their gameplay as anemic as Mark Howard's commentary.
What are we seeing at the SCG?
Sydney only scored 5 goals in the second, but made up for lost time in the third, increasing the gap to 100 with a golden masterclass less than halfway through the quarter. Joel Amati, Logan McDonald and Isaac Heaney drew level with the Eagles' goal tally, with Heaney's 4th giving the Swans their biggest three-quarter time score in their history. The margin? Just a lazy 137 points with 20 whole minutes to play, and it only took 18 seconds to make it 143. It took until roughly the 10-minute mark for the margin to pass 150, with a whole ground play resulting in Heaney embarrassing Tom Barrass. And Brady Howe, the wordplay doesn't work as well with him, especially because I'm probably saying his name wrong, but who really cares? It's Brady Howe. The Eagles finally managed to twitch some part of their desiccated corpse with an Oscar Allen goal, which, let's be honest, they shouldn't have been allowed to even get, as well as some actual defending that took a lot of interest out of the game. By this point, the only entertainment value was seeing records get broken, and the Eagles keeping Sydney goalless for nearly 15 minutes turned this game from a massacre into a live autopsy. It was a shame. It would have been cool to see a team break the 200 barrier for the first time since the Corio exorcism. And then, this happened. Now look, 2011 Melbourne were awful on that day in Geelong, but at no point did they allow a centre clearance goal from which the centre bounce wasn't won by a ruckman, but a midfielder. 197 points. And what better way to bring up the 200 than to honour the last side to have reached that mark? Yep, Sydney decided to stage their own recreation of the Corio exorcism. Keeping the ball in play in a back pocket when you really don't need to? Check. Piss farting around with handballs back there under no pressure? Check. A dashing run with a tackle evasion and a quick dish off? Check. A mark by a long-haired man who's batting well above his average on the ladies' front? Check. An unselfish pass to a less fancy player in a better position? Check. And all of this happening with no contact from an opponent while the ball is live? Check, mate. Hayden McLean had the honours of sealing it with a simple finish from the goal square, which he somehow missed. So much for the Swan River Massacre playmat posters. Not long later, McLean brought about the loudest cheer of the night by making amends and scoring a goal. Sydney raised the bat to celebrate the first double century of the SCG against an Australian team in 20 years. Problem was, the last time that was done, it was by Sachin Tendulkar. 205 to 34. West Coast, as a 23-man unit, scored as many points against a bottom four side as one man named after a vegetable had scored against them. A 171-point margin, Sydney's equal highest, together with another match against an injury-depleted team. To be fair to 1919 St Kilda, the Great War had just finished. Their already depleted list had to cope with 7 injuries in the prior week alone, and the Saints finished that match with 14 players on the field. West Coast didn't. The Swan River Massacre, thanks for the name idea code word, distilled all that was wrong with the Eagles in one all-too-public 2-hour display. At least their reserves only lost by 90 or so that week. Oh, hi Declan. Could really use you right about now. They'd conceded as many points as the 1992 Eagles, and there was still 9 games to go. But good news, Cripps and Hearn were back. The bad news, Petrevsky, Seaton and Yo joined the injury list for the second and third time, respectively. It was getting to the point where it was legitimately hard for me to track when guys were getting on or off the injury list. And then, the morning of the Saints game, they lose another 2 to illness. Remember how I talked about Harry Barnett? Well, welcome to the big leagues, kiddo. And then... Yep, I'm disappointed too. This script changed about 7 times over the course of this game. Eventually the Saints realised they were a finals contender playing a team with 1 win and got over the line, but still the Eagles had performed pretty well. Of all the senior level sides to cop 170-point batterings, their rebound game was far from the worst. Better than cryo-exorcism Melbourne anyway. The injury crisis began to plateau, with a lot of stars coming back to make the Richmond game a contest for about 3 quarters. They had a fairly easy run home though, including a match against North that would decide the wooden spoon. But first, a match against the struggling Carlton. The Eagles might have a chance here. Oh, God, no! Charlie Curnow became the second forward to kick 7 in a half in 2023 as the Blues scored so much they broke the AFL's score worm. Luke Shuey got injured for the 4th time in a season. Even when the Blues were a man down in rotation, the Eagles were about as much of a threat as a teddy bear nailed to a shelf, registering more 50-metre penalties against than goals scored in the first half. They stemmed the bleeding in a boring second half, with Blues fans amusing themselves by booing Sam Petrevsky-Seaton, a player so run-of-the-mill that the Eagles would delist him at season's end. But they stopped their booing when Charlie scored his 10th and ruined the Coleman medal race for the rest of the season, and made me do this. Thanks, Charlie. But their next game was winnable. North Melbourne at home. Somehow the Eagles managed to convince 38,000 people to watch a match between 2 of the worst teams of all time, for different reasons, who both had active losing streaks of 16 matches. The Eagles made a break in the first, but North pegged them back in the second. Then the Eagles kept the Roos scoreless in the third, and it looked like they were trotting off to win number 2, 32 points up, a minute into the final term. Then Larkey scored a goal. No big deal. Zeri Tristan adds another, but it's a whole 5 minutes later. Everything's fine. Larkey scores another. Oh, gee, it's a bit tight here, lads. Then LDU brings the margin to 7. Hit that panic button. North were hitting the Eagles in waves, with West Coast not even looking close to scoring. It looked like North would eventually overwhelm their feeble, tired foes. But a rush behind and a miss by eventual Rising Star winner Harry Cheezel ensured that both sides ended the round tied on 8 premiership points. There was still a chance, albeit remote, that one of the top 5 worst teams of the AFL era wouldn't finish last. They recovered the next week from 30 down to take the lead with 100 seconds left against the Bombers, only for Essendon to sweep straight through them and break their hearts, robbing them of 17th place. Still, the competitive Eagles, and I can't believe I'm saying those two words combined, look like dark horses to steal a derby win, and oh dear God, no. After taking a 14-0 lead, West Coast scored 5 behinds over the next 80 minutes, with Jack Williams' last-minute goal almost saving the Eagles from the first triple-figure margin in a derby since a massive win by their 2000 selves, who were weird but in a very different way. They would gain some important players for the match against the Dogs side, who needed a win to stay in the 8, but it was all for naught as West Coast scored 4 of the first 5 goals. Okay. They weathered a late storm to register win number 3, meaning that the worst team on percentage since the AFL era began wouldn't even be the worst team of the year. I wrote that as the Suns began demolishing the Roos in their final game. All they had to do was just not completely fuck up, and West Coast would be spared. This is the Suns we're talking about though, so they did completely fuck up. That's 80% of their next premiership side right there. The final game was a dead rubber for both the Eagles and the Crows, with the only point of interest being Taylor Walker's brave but futile run to prevent me from taking a cow-juiced shower. Rather sportingly, the Eagles decided to let Tex have about 8 million scoring shots, but for some bizarre reason, decided to be competitive as well. Luke Shuey and Shannon Hearn, who combined for 9 2023 injuries, called it a day before this clash and managed to limp their way through. Nick Natanui, who'd missed the entire season, also joined them in retirement, beginning the rebuild that by all rights should have started about 2 years ago. And this is what you're here to see. 45 players on the list, 40 players used, 38 players injured, 63 total injuries, 337 games missed due to injury, and a sum total of 28,939 games of missing experience due to those injuries. The average West Coast player missed nearly 9 games in 2023 due to injury. Despite the extra match played, 2023 slots into last place of all the non-COVID seasons for West Coast in terms of scoring, and by averages it's worse than that 2020 season. For points conceded though, oh dear. In a year where no team went in the same postcode as averaging 100 points per game, West Coast conceded 116 per game. Nowhere near as bad as, say, 2007 Carlton, but scoring rates are relative. The best comparison for truly terrible teams is percentage. They were never a chance at claiming St Kilda's post-war record. If 2012 GWS, a bunch of children holding hands with men old enough to be their fathers, couldn't sleep that low, then no one can. But boy, did the Eagles make a run at it. After Adelaide, it was at 2013 GWS levels. After Sydney, it was well below 1996 Fitzroy. Yikes! Eventually, as the injury crisis resolved itself and as they somehow won 2 whole games, their percentage soared to 1966 Fitzroy levels, but still comfortably the worst 3-win post-war team and the worst 3-win team since 1898 Carlton, and the 6th worst of any post-war team. And the squad, well, it's better than a lot of those teams down here. Natanui, Shuey, Yo, McGovern, Barras, these guys would make any top 8 team's best 22 when fit. That's the problem though. They weren't. Not only did that rob the club of 1,000 games of experience almost every week, it tied up a lot of money. Like, a lot. Here's every club ranked by how many of their players appear in the Herald Sun's top 100 paid players. Being the Herald Sun, this list is hardly gospel, but it serves a purpose as a general guide. Each player on it is earning 550k minimum. 13 of the 18 clubs have 5 such players, showing how equal league spending is under a salary cap. At the top we have Melbourne and... Oh boy. A cluster of clubs sit close, including our Eagles. Not ideal, but not awful. Until we trim the fat. If we pare this down to only the top 60 listed players with a spending floor of around $675,000, most clubs fall down the rankings. Only two don't budge an inch. The first are the Giants, which are their own weird tale, who somehow rose from 13th to being a point away from the grand final within 3 months. The second are our Eagles. Yeah, the teams that combine for a quarter of all players paid at least $700K spent the mid-season bye here. The Giants can take solace in the fact that none of their players are in the top 10. The Eagles have two. They spent $5 million, around half the salary cap, on 6 blokes with an average age of 30, with another 4 over 30s clogging up the list, all 4 spending major time in the medical rooms. The team sat exactly in the middle in terms of experience and average age, but with few veterans actually out on the park. The kids they brought in to replace them were, in the main, just nowhere near good enough. The injury crisis ran deep too. West Coast's WAFL reserve side bore the brunt of the senior side's player unavailability, going winless with a percentage just under 32, around the same as what St Kilda had in 1901. Yeah, it's 1900 St Kilda bad, and they had their own injury crisis as well. As of the mid-season bye, a further 12 non-AFL listed players were on their injury list. 2 were for COVID, but that leaves 10, more than all but 3 AFL clubs at the time. They averaged just 54 points scored and conceded 138 per game. It made their previous season's effort, which was horrendous, look Herculean in comparison. West Perth racked up 217 points on them. Perth only managed 124, but still nearly won by 3 digits. And when the seniors had a bye, the reserves couldn't even stack their side because they had a bye as well. And 7 days after Sydney put their seniors through the wood chipper, a team spearheaded by a St Kilda reject put another 200 points past the West Coast side. The Waffle has always been a league of, shall we say, varying quality. There's been a few teams with multiple 150-point losses in the same season. Discounting a war-affected South Fremantle side, no team has suffered bigger twin batterings than these Eagles, who had a percentage pretty close to those 1944 Bulldogs. But after their latest humiliation, the West Coast Colts stomped back. As the senior players returned, so too did the reserve side's competitiveness, earning a draw the week after losing by 30 goals. Losses by 28 and 3, despite a smattering of larger beatings, improved their percentage from 30 to 39. Their only role was determining the order of the finalists, which actually depended on how badly each side had thrashed West Coast. Pythagorean win expectation is an estimation based on a team's points for and against of how many wins a team with that record would be expected to get. In the 22-game era, or past it, now we're at 23, only 3 non-expansion teams have sunk below 1 expected win. 1996 Fitzroy, 2013 Melbourne, and 2023 West Coast. And of all 3 win teams, they comfortably have the lowest Pythagorean win expectation, even lower than 2011 West Coast. That's how bad it got for them. And I don't want to say, oh, it can get worse from here, because I said that last year, and look what happened. As it is, the 2023 West Coast Eagles will occupy a very special place in West Coast history as the very worst, very unluckiest, very brokenest side that they've ever fielded for at least another 10 months. They are the Broken Wings.